As you guys know, we are continuing our series of Sought and Rescued, the story of salvation. So tonight we have with us the founder of Galilee, Go to Galilee Ministry. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, check it out. It's a website. It's pretty cool. Not to mention, too, is so Jacob Stange is a good friend of mine. We've known each other for about a year or two now. And great man of faith. Also, most notably, he is a husband and a father. And so I always think those are usually the most important characteristics of us outside of our belonging to Christ. But with that, and without further ado, Jacob Stange.
Hello? Hey. Can you hear me in the back? Yeah. Just don't yell into the mic, right? Okay. You're supposed to save all the clapping for the end because then we actually know whether or not it was worth it. All right, so tonight we want to talk about Jacob and Joseph. And he talked about themes of running away from God. And I'm going to steer us toward a particular meditation that we'll talk about at the end. But Jacob and Joseph are some fun characters, not just because my name is Jacob and this is the year of Joseph, which are good enough reasons on their own for me, because that's a really important thing to me. I want to just talk about this from a standpoint of prayer. It's important. It's been important in my life, and if you have a name that's biblical or a name of a saint, I find it really valuable to receive their promises in my prayers in Scripture, to allow myself to do that, because all the promises that I'm going to get in the Old Testament are barely a foretaste of who we are in Christ Jesus and what we're supposed to receive. So looking at this from the standpoint of meditation, I want to try and sketch the characters of Jacob and Joseph, because they're interesting characters. And I'm going to do a really bad job, and I'm probably going to do a different job than any of you would do, but that's to me, a really important meditational exercise. Because when I can get inside somebody's skin and I can put it on, even if I'm not doing a great job of it, yeah, it can be gross if you think about it that way. It's going to be a night of double meanings. But when I can get inside that, then I can see the world differently. And I can see more than I could see before. Kind of like Jonah, who couldn't see to a certain degree beyond the end of his own nose. I knew you were going to do this, God. I knew you were going to forgive them. Why are we here? I want to return to that at the end of the talk, because we're going to see a similar theme in Jacob and Joseph. Let's start with Jacob, just to kind of cover our bases. Jacob is a cheater. I relate to that. I mean, that's what his name means. We fancy it up with terms like usurper and things like that. But Jacob is a cheater. And that's actually a name that his father and mother gave him, kind of from the midwife. But also, it's a name his brother gives him on a regular basis. So Jacob has this kind of quick story arc, comes out of the womb holding onto his brother's ankle. He's like, I'm not letting you get away from me. Then he's going to steal his brother's birthright. His brother's going to come in. He's been working out in the fields. Jacob is like this quiet guy, hangs out in the tent. That's what it says. He was a person who stays in tents. What does that even mean? He's a person who stays in tents, while his brother is like a hunter-gatherer type. Yeah, super rugged. His brother Esau, he's red. Esau means red, because he's a really ruddy guy. He's a really rugged guy. And that's how he keeps showing up over and over again in the stories about him. But literally, just for frame of reference, half of Genesis is going to be spent telling the story of Jacob and by extension Joseph. Because Joseph's story is still also Jacob's. They're basically going to die at the same point in Genesis. So chapter 25 to chapter 50, Jacob and Joseph. So he's going to steal his brother's birthright. Then he's going to steal his brother's inheritance, his blessing from his father. And then he's going to light a shuck and get out of there because his brother wants to kill him. Like good older brothers do when you steal everything they have. So he's going to run away, and God's going to come to him and talk to him. He's like, I'm going to take care of you. Okay. He runs away, finds a wife, 4 actually. Decides that it's time to come back. He's going to swindle his father-in-law. Well, one of his father-in-laws, I guess. He's going to swindle his father-in-law, and he's going to attribute it to himself at first, and then he's going to attribute it to God and kind of give God the credit for helping him become really wealthy. And then he's going to come back to visit his brother and hope that he doesn't die. He hopes. But in all of this, he doesn't listen to God. God talks to him. And in fact, he tells us, we're kind of aware of a couple of times where God speaks to him really obviously. God comes to him and he shows him this ladder from heaven to earth. And the church fathers will tell us, hey, that ladder is Jesus. I'll set that aside for a moment. But God comes to Jacob and he tells him things like, I'm going to take care of you. He doesn't receive that. He doesn't accept it. And when he goes back to visit his brother again, he's like, I've been talking to God lately, he says to his wives. He's like, God's been talking to me lately. And we don't see that one, but God reiterated what he had already told Jacob, and he's going to come back, they're going to head back to meet his brother, and God's going to talk to him again, and he's going to tell him the same thing again. He's going to give him the promises that he gave his grandfather Abraham. I'm going to back up and sketch his character a little bit more. So Jacob is the son of Isaac, is the son of Abraham. Who can tell me who loved Isaac, whose brother was Ishmael, more? His father or his mother? Sir? Mother. His mother. His father was like, when God comes to Abraham and says, I'm going to bless Isaac, not Ishmael. Abraham's like, bless Ishmael too. He's like, he will be blessed, but not this way. Not like this. Sarah's like, get that Ishmael the heck out of here. Send his mother away. Send the kid away. I've got my own, which is all I really wanted at the end of the day. She doesn't like him at all. When we come to Jacob, whose favorite is he? Isaac's or Rebekah's? Rebekah's. Again, we've got the favorite son of the mother, of the favorite son of the mother. Mom's got your back. Anybody know anybody who might be like that you grew up with? Like their mom always had their back? They didn't live in tents, did they? This is going to get interesting because I like to compare myself to Jacob a little bit. Okay? So he's going to buy his brother's birthright. One day Esau comes in and he's starving because he's been out in the field working. And he's like, give me some of that soup. I'm about to die. I'm so tired. Really? You're red-faced all the time. I mean, this is not anything special. He's like, okay. Jacob is very exploitative. He is always grasping at, what can I get to make my position better, to make my life better? And he's like, give me your birthright. Fine. Give me your lentil soup. And he does. And he gets his brother's birthright, which is kind of like his right to inheritance. So, I mean, it's kind of ugly, honestly. Later, Isaac's coming to the end of his life, and he says, go out and hunt and bring food, and I'm going to give you, after you feed me some of my favorite food, I'm going to give you the blessing as the eldest son. Now, the blessing of the eldest son is always going to include certain things. All of your siblings will serve you. You will be the preeminent one. You are the carrier of the promise. So, Esau, it's a good boy, goes out. No, actually, he was not. He had 2 wives that drove both his parents crazy, but he was still the favorite for his dad. Anyway, so he goes out, goes hunting. Rebekah hears this, says to Jacob, let's make some food. Jacob's like, he's going to find out because I'm not hairy and ruddy like my brother. So they do this ruse. She makes food. He takes it in. He lies to his father. I'm Esau. Give me my blessing. Here's the food. His father eats. He gives him his blessing. He's the one in charge. The blessing of Abraham is on him. All of his brothers will serve him. Esau comes back, finds out. He is furious. Isaac is terrified. I mean, the guy is like, the fear of God is on him. He's like, what have I done? And Esau is begging him and crying, give me a blessing too. He's like, I already gave it to your brother. He's like, give me one anyway. And he's like, fine. Eventually, he's like, you're going to serve your brother, but eventually you'll throw the yoke off. It's actually not going to take very long, because then he immediately begins plotting his brother's death. It's pretty quick. And in that case, both parents help Jacob get away. They're like, go. This is the first time that God really comes and speaks to Jacob, who Jacob, like, all along is like, I'm going to steal your birthright. I'm going to steal your blessing. Even though I got people helping me, he's like, I'm just going to grasp at whatever is going to make me better off. Well, now the better off thing is just not be dead, because otherwise that blessing isn't going to get me very far. So he runs off. God appears to him in the place that he's going to call Bethel, the house of God. And he's like, sees this, and he's like, this is the house of God. He's going to anoint the place. God's like, I'm going to take care of you. Jacob does not listen. He goes on to his to-be father-in-law, Laban, falls in love with Laban's daughter, Rachel, and he's like, Jacob is just head over heels. And I do appreciate that about the patriarchs. Like, when they fall in love, they are head over heels. Definitely the case with Isaac. There's some interesting arguments about that being the case with Abraham. Definitely the case with Jacob. Totally lost. He's like, I will work for you for 7 years for your daughter. 7 years. This is before he finds out that God is going to bless everything that he lays his hands on. Laban is going to become so rich, is going to be beyond imagining, and it's all because of Jacob. Jacob's going to tend his flocks, and all the flocks are going to reproduce like crazy, like rabbits. He's going to have 1 million goats and 1 million sheep. He's not going to know what to do with them all. And so he serves for 7 years, and Laban tricks him and gives him his daughter, and also he gives his daughter a servant, which later also becomes a wife for Jacob. And Jacob's like, you tricked me. He's like, well, we don't do that around here. We have to give the older daughter away first. And he's like, so wait a week and I'll give you the other one. And he waits, literally that's what it says, he waits a week, he gets Rachel, and then he works 7 more years for her. Obviously head over heels. I mean, I think I probably would have headed out after that. This is a crazy situation. And over the course of his time with Laban is when all of his children are born. I think except maybe Benjamin. I don't remember when Benjamin is born. But like all of his kids are born then. There's this huge strife between his wives. They're like trading drug plants so that they can be with him. And Leah is totally, Jacob doesn't care. Like he would not see her at all, except for the fact that God's like, I am going to bless her every time. She's going to have a baby every time you're together. And that's how it works out. And then when she can't have kids anymore, then she's like, take my servant, please. It's really weird stuff. And then he's like, I'm going to get out of here. I want to get out of here, but I want to go with something for all my work. I worked for you for 14 years. And Laban's like, going to try and not let him get away with anything. And he's like, tell you what, he says, I'll take all the speckled and spotted and striped sheep. And Laban says, sounds good. Goes to his sons and he says, take all the speckled and spotted sheep and take them on a 3-day journey. So Jacob gets none. Remember, God promised that he was going to take care of Jacob. He was going to provide for him. He's been blessing all of his work up to this point. And Jacob starts doing things to arrange his own good. He's like, I'm going to put speckled and spotted and striped wood in front of the sheep where they go to water, and they're going to have speckled and spotted and striped kids. That's how that works. Science, right? That's literally what he says. He's like, I did this. But then later when he's like, all right, we're just going to cut loose and we're going to get out of here. And his wives are like, he's like, I've been talking to God. It's time for me to go. And his wives are like, well, our father's basically disinherited us because he hates you now because you've been stealing all his sheep essentially and making them part of your flock. And Jacob's like, I didn't actually do that. God did that. Science. So he deals shrewdly with Laban, runs off with most of his flock. Laban comes after him, and God tells Laban, you leave him the heck alone and don't say 2 words to him. And Laban's like, let's just make a covenant. We're not going to cross this point anymore. Okay? Jacob's going to go on. He's going to send everything that he has ahead of him, knowing that he's going to meet Esau. And he's alone by himself one night, and God comes to him and wrestles with him. And he reiterates the promise of Abraham. He's like, I'm going to give you all this land that you're going to be in Canaan. I'm going to give it to your people. You're going to have nations for your children, and I will care for you in every way. Does Jacob listen at this point? Who knows? No. He doesn't listen. He wakes up and he says, I'll make a deal with you, God. Literally, that's what he does. He wakes up and he's like, I'll make a deal with you. If you keep me from dying, you will be my God. Where have we been all this time? He's like, I'll make a deal with you. You will be my God, and I will give you 10% of everything that I have. First example that I think we see of tithing in Scripture. He's like, he already promised. He didn't put any strings on it, but whatever, okay? So he wrestles with God, still won't let him go unless he blesses him, always grasping, always reaching for more than he's got. You just wrestled with an angel. I mean, he seems to know that he's not wrestling with a human being, even while it's going on. And then when he loses, because his leg's hanging limp at his side, he's like, I guess he could have stepped on his head and killed him if he wanted to, but he's like, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. Even in losing, he's going to continue grasping for more good, and that's when God gives him the blessing. Finally, God says, I will be with you. Jacob's like, all right, God told me he would take care of me. I made this deal with him, but I'm going to split my family into 2 camps. So hopefully if Esau kills half of us, the other half will escape. And then I'm going to save least favorite wife first. So Leah and her servant and all those kids go first. And then Rachel and her kids go after. And then Jacob. And he's like, I should be able to see the slaughter from here before it's happening and run. Because he's still grasping. He's still not listening to God. He's still not paying attention. We're going to pause the story here and move on to Joseph. And we'll come back to Jacob in a little bit. Joseph, whose name means may he add or may he increase, is another favorite child. But I don't think that's his defining characteristic. Who can remember Joseph's first 2 dreams? Actually, his only 2 dreams that are recounted in Scripture. Anybody? Tell me one of the dreams.
Is it the one with the sun and the moon?
One of them has the sun and the moon and the stars. What's the other one? There's no wolf. Sheaves of wheat. Yes. Okay. So these are really cool dreams. There are 11 sheaves of wheat, and they bow before Joseph's sheaf of wheat. Okay. And then he has another one where there's the sun and the moon and the stars, 11 stars, bowing before him. Who interprets the dreams for him? His mom is dead. Wrong, sorry. His family. His brothers interpret the dreams. And ultimately, while they hate him because he's the favorite, they hate him more because they know what his dreams mean. This is an important part of the culture. Joseph doesn't grow up with a special gift for dream interpretation. No, he says to Pharaoh, the interpretation belongs to God. But this is a culture that he grows up in. His brothers and his father interpret the dreams for him. They rebuke him anyway, but they interpret the dreams for him like, you're going to be in charge of us. His mother is already dead, and his father says, your mother is dead. Your mother and I and your brothers are all going to bow to you? What are you talking about? And then he goes off and he does a really kind of Marian thing. He begins to ponder the dream. Jacob does. But his brothers hate him, not just because he's favorite, but because they know what his dreams mean. And when they throw him into a well, they say, what will become of his dreams? Reuben apparently doesn't know what happened to him. He thinks he's dead. It's interesting. Going back through it for the umpteenth time, I had not recognized that before. So Joseph, not unlike Jacob, but in a greater degree, is going to be blessed by God in everything that he does. So, you know anybody who's just naturally gifted, like everything they do it really well? You know, somebody like they could play any sport and probably go pro if they wanted to? Anybody know somebody like that?
Please. If you ever watched Wizards, the TV show Wizards of Waverly Place, Justin Bosco was like Justin Bosco had a knack of being like super smart at everything.
Okay. So there's a good example. Wizards of Waverly Place. I can think of 2 or 3 people in my own life that are like that. Like they can do anything. And how much, for those of you who know a person like that, how much do they appreciate that gift, that ability to do anything? They appreciate it a lot or a little? They're bored. So Joseph has like abundant blessings and he doesn't pay attention to it. Like he is in Potiphar's house. He's been sold as a slave. He is almost immediately the master of the house. Now Potiphar isn't just anybody. He's literally like, not quite second, but maybe like third in command in a god kingdom in Egypt. He's really high up. He's the captain of the guard. All of Pharaoh's prisoners, all of Pharaoh's enemies, stay at his house. So he's put in charge of the captain of the guard's house. Almost immediately, God blesses everything he does. Potiphar is like, I have nothing to worry about. It literally says he worries about nothing except the food he eats. Nothing except the food he eats. He has no worries in his life because Joseph is responsible for everything. The captain of the guard's wife entraps Joseph and makes up some story about how he tried to rape her. And Potiphar is like, clearly you're a bad dude. Clearly you're a bad dude. We're going to put you in prison. Puts him in prison. Joseph immediately becomes in charge of the prison. It says the chief jailer had no concerns and entrusted everything to Joseph. Joseph do anything with that? No. Here he goes. Everywhere he goes, God is blessing what he's doing, and nothing. He is not listening. Like his father, he's not listening at all to what God is doing. He's blessed with increase beyond measure, and he pays no attention. Finally, we start to see a change in Jacob and Joseph's life. It's kind of similar timeline for both. Joseph is like, he's in jail. The baker and the cupbearer get thrown in jail with him. Now, in the movies, like they're in the same cell together. Joseph's in charge of them. He's taking care of them. Like, in one sense, like kind of waiting on hand and foot, but also like he's their gatekeeper. And they're like, we had these dreams. And now he begins to interpret dreams. He tells them their dreams. And for the first time, he sees that God is doing something in his life. He's like, maybe I should cooperate. Maybe I should be involved in what's happening here. Because he's the opposite of his dad. He doesn't grasp for things for his own good. he has no appreciation for all of the good that just naturally seems to fall out about him. And he says, hey, cupbearer, when you're not beheaded like that guy, well, not beheaded, hung, when you're not hung like the baker, would you remember me before Pharaoh? Would you intercede for my case? That would be nice. It's the first time he does anything like that. Cupbearer goes before Pharaoh, doesn't remember a thing until Pharaoh is plagued by these dreams. And, pun there, he's plagued by these dreams, and he's like, who can interpret these for me? And all of his normal sorcerers and whatnots can interpret it for him. And the cupbearer's like, do you remember when you hated me? It's actually like how he starts. He's like, remember when you were angry at me and you put me in prison? I really wouldn't begin there if I was that close to a god king. He's like, you remember when you hated me? There was this guy in prison with me, and he could explain dreams. And now, Joseph steps it up a notch. He comes out, he's like, gets his clothes changed, gets freshened up, and he's probably had some time to think about what's about to happen. And Pharaoh explains his dream, and he says, what does it mean? And he begins to explain the dreams. And he makes sure not to give all the good details first and all the bad details last. And he gives the explanation for the dream, which, as he said, belongs to God. But he doesn't stop there. He goes and says, you should do this, Pharaoh. He tells him what to do. He came with a plan. Take a fifth of all the food. This fifth, rather than a tithe, was to become the normal practice in Egypt when they owned things, was to take a fifth away. The slaves in Goshen, the Egyptians, who the Hebrews actually become slaves while Joseph is still in Egypt. He actually accepts their slavery for them. It's a really interesting element to the story. But he's like, for the rest of your lives, for the rest of your generations, you will give a fifth of everything that you own back to Pharaoh to show that you are his slaves, that you belong to him. So he's like, we'll just take a fifth and set it aside. This is what you should do, Pharaoh. Take a fifth and set it aside. And so Egypt has grain to feed literally the whole world. Like, how much abundance? How much abundance, since this is a story about abundance, how much abundance did Egypt have that they were able to feed nations surrounding them and themselves for 7 years on 1/5 of 7 years of produce? I'm thinking, like, put half of it away. I'm thinking this sounds like American society where we got a lot of waste. He then carries this even further when his brothers come to visit him. And he sees his brothers are delivered into his hand, and he's like, wait, before I say, hey brothers, I'm your brother, first I'm going to test you. And he's going to test them hard, and he's going to test them over and over again. And he's going to confuse them and sow doubt. He's going to be like, you guys are obviously spies. I'm going to keep one of you and send the rest of you back. He gives them food. He sells them food. He also gives them back their money, which is kind of like he owns them. He could have them sent to prison. He could do everything that's been done to him by having them walk off with the money that they were supposed to spend on the food. They go back to their father. Jacob has learned something in his years. He's no longer the risk taker that he once was. He's no longer grasping for everything. He says, you know what? In the absence of God speaking, he's like, I have to cut my losses here. They're like, we need to go back for Simeon. He's like, Joseph is lost and Simeon is lost. I won't lose Benjamin. This is a very different Jacob. And he continues to be extremely reluctant. Even when he finds out that it is Joseph, his son, who is in Egypt, he's very reluctant. He's like, I guess I'll go see my son before I die. He's very reluctant about it. But then God appears to him on the way, and he says, I'll take care of you again. And after that, he's good. Let's go. I'll take care of you, and I will bring you back out of there. And God reiterates his promise. Canaan, the land you came from, not Egypt, will be your home. Will be where your nations that come from you will live. So Jacob becomes less rash. He's going to take fewer risks. He's never going to risk things again the way he did with Esau. And he doesn't go to Egypt himself and resist sending Benjamin, even to save Simeon. He's just going to cut Simeon off. It's like, just cut my losses here. And I'm going to save the youngest brother, the new favorite brother. But he also begins to trust more in the Lord's action. He's like, I haven't had any dreams lately, so I'm not willing to take this risk. I'm very reluctant to go to Egypt. Egypt is always going to be a sign of evil, a sign of opposition to God's plan. I'm not going to go to Egypt. Joseph becomes aware of his responsibility to cooperate with the blessings that God is giving him. He learns to pay attention, as Jacob learned to pay attention to what God was doing in his life. Both of these have learned watchfulness. Watchfulness goes hand in hand with trust. And watchfulness is a theme that for us shows up over and over again in the gospel. For what do we watch? As Christians, as little Christs, as disciples, for what do we watch? For the second coming of Christ? For sure. But for a lot more than that. We watch for what God's hand is doing now in our lives, like it was for Jacob and Joseph. We watch for the invitation to our own next conversion, because watchfulness has to do with the heart. Like Jonah, Jacob and Joseph think both too big in terms of plans and too small. Too small because they do not see the overarching plan of God. They see, my life is at risk now. I have enough now. I'll be satisfied with that. That's not big enough. They're also too big because they ignore the fact that all along the way, while it was about God's plan of salvation, which was not going to be undone, God's like, I'm going to take care of you. You're not going to die. You have the blessing. You have the promise. I will bring generations from you. I will make you the line of the Messiah. But they thought too big because they didn't realize that while God was doing that, he was also always about their own hearts. He was always training their own hearts. And that is why we watch. So what I'd like you to leave with tonight is Proverbs 4, verse 23, or 24 if you have an RSV. Keep your heart with all watchfulness, because watchfulness has to do with the heart. For from it flow springs of life. The heart is the organ of our relationship with God. And that's where our watchfulness has to lie. Where our relationship with him is. Because he's always going to be working for his greater plan. But he's also always going to be working for the good of our own hearts and our relationship with him. Thank you.